Hello everyone, welcome to the chapter 3 of International Trade Practice. Today, we are going to talk about Incoterms and how it is being used in global logistic process. Our topic outline are the definition of Incoterms, its classification, features, purpose, and how it is being applied in global logistic process. Our objectives are to understand the important concept of Incoterms and its development. We aim to identify the 11 Incoterms and determine each features and its purpose. And lastly, let us identify the specific functions of Incoterms in global logistic process. With the complexity of international trading and demographic profile of the stakeholders, problem with the interpretation of contract leads to commercial dispute. The use of right term or language in a contract ensures all parties maintain and fulfill their obligation. In 1936, there was an initiative globally to standardize international trade practice. The International Chamber of Commerce published six Incoterms. Followed after World War II, there was a rise of new Incoterms for non-maritime transport. Then, on 2010, 11 Incoterms were completed. The development of Incoterms aims to eliminate inconsistencies in language by giving all parties the same definitions of specific terms within a trade agreement. And as a result, the risk of problems during shipment is reduced since all parties clearly understand their responsibilities in performing trade under the given contract. Incoterms defined by International Chamber of Commerce as essential term of trade for sales of good. UNCTAD had defined Incoterm as mutual obligations of seller and buyer arising from the movement of goods under an international contract from the standpoint of risk, cost, and documents. So please take note of the word risk, cost, and documents. Okay, some definition it is described as tasks. Okay, because as we go along with our discussion with Incoterms, okay, we will identify who is responsible to pay a particular cost, who is responsible to secure and to process a document, and which point of global logistic process we're in you could see that the standpoint of risk. Incoterm is an acronym standing for International Commercial Term, and the trademark is owned by International Chambers of Commerce or the ICC. It is registered in several countries. Through the effort of ICC, many contemporary trade landscape of Incoterms was completed. From 1923, ICC's first sounding commercial term to clarify improvement in 1928 to misinterpretation corrected in 1967, and in 2020 they had already accomplished and envisioned the fulfillment of such development. Why do you think international trader should use Incoterms in international trade? First, it could lessen the unpredictability caused by trade practices in different countries. Secondly, to make the life of traders easier in dealing with negotiations. And the third one, international traders should use Incoterm rules, okay, to help buyer and seller understand their respective obligations. From 1923, international chambers of commerce had already developed, clarified, and made some modification with the Incoterms. Now let us see what are the difference between the 2010 Incoterms and 2020 Incoterms. I think there's no such of a lot of changes, maybe more on modification, like for example, changing the code, DAT changed to DPU, and also they made some clarification with the insurance points in CIF and CIP Incoterms. Mostly, the modification and the differences comes from the cost and the cost structure, the security related to transport had been given a detailed information, and also the provisions, okay, allowing use to the use of own transport rather than assuming third party transport. And also there are some specific distinction of the task in FCA, FOB, and then the bills of lading. And another one is if you could see the book of Incoterms 2010 and Incoterms 2020, they had presented the Incoterms 2020 for more user friendly. This is for the purpose of academic usage. Okay, so they are designed the Incoterms in 2020 for academic purposes. How to use the Incoterms 2010 or 2020 rules. You may use Incoterms in contract sale. You have to specify which kind of Incoterms that you are going to use in every aspect of global logistic process. Okay, so this term is a guide for the obligations and duties to be observed. Okay, you have to choose relevant term or appropriate term to the nature of your shipping. Remember, okay, Incoterm is just a part of contract wherein it tells both party, the buyer and the seller, of their clear responsibility, risks, and who will bear the cost. Incoterms do not cover or dictate condition of the contract, nor the listing of products or service being sold. More so, it did not cover also the mode of payment in sales of contract. Incoterms do not cover also the title or ownership of the goods passes from the seller to the buyer. Either the documents stated in the transaction is not being dictated by the Incoterms. It is the responsibility of the custom administration or the local government agencies, okay, to request a documents intended for export or import processes. And lastly, if there will be some failure, okay, in the contract of sales, or there will be some dispute between buyer and seller, okay, Incoterms, okay, doesn't say anything or it doesn't cover with that kind of dispute. Alternative dispute resolution is covered with the responsibility of international commercial arbitration. What are the main features of Incoterms? Okay, Incoterms is consist of the new Incoterms and the old Incoterms, the DAC, DAP, DAF, and the rest of the 11 Incoterms. And these Incoterms has two classes. Okay, rules for any mode of transportation and rules is specifically used for sea and inland waterway transport. Some of the additional main features of Incoterms are electronic communication. So these are wire and wireless communication system. It covers the transfers of signs, signals, writings, images, data, or intelligence of any nature transfer. Also, the insurance coverage, permits, clearance in custom administrations, and terminal handling charges is included in the main features of Incoterm. Lastly, the string sales is covered in Incoterm, which means multiple sale of goods during transit. So I'm going to tell you later on which Incoterm we're in uh wherein the seller can still sell the goods even it is still in the ship, and we call it string sale. Okay, now one by one, that let us identify the different rules intended for mode or modes of transport and the term used for sea transport. For mode of transport or rules for any mode of transport, we have seven. Okay, we have seven, and these are X works or X warehouse. FCA stands for free carrier. CPT, carriage paid to. CIP, carriage and insurance paid to. DAT, delivered at terminal. DAP, delivered at place. DDP, delivered duty paid. So in Incoterms 2020, DAT had been replaced to DPU. So it is delivered at place unloaded. For our sea and inland waterways, okay, we have four Incoterms, and these are FAS, free alongside ship, FOB, free on board, CFR, cost and freight, CIF, cost insurance and freight. There's another way to categorize the Incoterms by using the first letter of each term. Okay, so we have the E terms, the F terms, so we have three, and for the C terms we have four C's, and D terms we have three D's. Okay, again, I want to emphasize that Incoterms, okay, we talk about who is the cost bearer, risk, and which particular task to be performed by buyer and seller. Okay, so let's move on to the another. Okay, so you could see here for the E terms, okay, buyer bears all cost and risks. Okay, remember that, okay? It's the buyer who take all the risk, who take all the cost, okay, and take all the responsibility. Okay, once the products or goods is ready for pickup in the factory. For F terms, okay, F terms, remember that normally, okay, buyer pays the main freight. Okay, so in this term, the main concept is that the buyer pays the main freight or the shipping fee. Okay, the shipping fee. Okay. For the C terms, you can see that the main freight is being paid by the seller. Okay, the main freight is being paid by the seller. So from the CPT, CIP, CFR, CIF, the responsibility of paying the freight or the shipping cost goes to the seller. And the D terms, okay, in the opposite responsibility of E term is that seller bears all cost and risks. You remember that D terms the seller bear all cost and risk, okay, from the packaging up to the unloading of goods to the origin destination of the buyer. Remember that. Before we understand how Incoterms is being used in every steps of global logistics, I want you to understand first what happened in this particular step. Number one is the packing, wherein the goods are being packed in the manufacturing site and then it will be loaded into the truck, then drive it going to the port. Okay? And in the port, it must undergo some inspection by the custom administration. Okay? So they need to comply with some regulations. They need to submit some documents like pro forma invoice, custom packing list, certificate of origin or the COO, a customs invoice, shipping bill, bill of lading, bill of site, and letter of credit. So these are some of the documents that the exporter must present to the custom administration. And then if the documents is complete, okay, the goods will be delivered to the port or warehouse, and they call it handling outbound. Like in airplane, they're going to hold the goods into the boarding area. Okay, and while waiting, okay, the insurance must be processed. Some of the exporter already processed the insurance prior to the delivery of the goods. So that's why it's very important that they present the certificate of insurance. Okay, and after that, if everything is clear, then it will be transported via international transportation, okay? Either by ship or by airplane, okay? And then after that, upon the arrival in the origin of destination, it will be uh, unloaded in the holding area. Okay, in the holding area. Okay, because some of the ship, okay, might go to the other route. So that's why the ship or the cargo or the goods must be unloaded, okay, to the destination. And after that, okay, again, it must be presented, the certificates, the documents must be presented to the custom administration. They need to present the same documents, okay, and some other documents, okay, to the custom administration. And then, if there will be no problem again, okay, the goods are now ready for pick up, okay. Either it is being arranged by the buyer or being arranged by the seller, and then it will be transported going to the unloading area of the buyer. Okay, it is very important that we understand first what happened in every steps of global logistic process. Why? For us to appreciate why a buyer or a seller decided to take the risk or to take the task or transfer the task to the buyer or to the seller. Okay? I want to clarify and emphasize again what are those specific tasks, okay, cost and risk covered in Incoterms. It includes the shipping cost, insurance cost, import cost, the documents and the permits to get custom clearance, the transportation, and where does this go, or the liability for the goods and until when, because there are some provisions in the contract of sales. Okay, let's say for example, if it is in the warehouse and there's a problem with the documents of buyer, and you know what, in the warehouse of custom, they are paying every day. Okay, they are paying like they are renting a space in the warehouse. So if in case that the buyer failed to present a particular documents so that they could claim the goods in the custom, okay, buyer is responsible to pay the leasing fee in the warehouse of custom. That's why it is very important that you identify whose responsibility. Is it buyer or seller? Before we proceed on the discussion of the particular duties and responsibilities of buyer and seller, I want to explain first what is freight collect terms and freight prepaid terms. Okay, freight collect terms is the freight for the shipment that is being paid at the destination. Okay, and the freight prepaid means that the freight for the shipment is paid before the cargo actually gets loaded for the shipment. So this is upon the agreement of the buyer and the seller. It must be written in the contract. Along the way of transporting goods, there is a set of Incoterms to establish which costs and risks are agreed to be paid by the seller or buyer, and in which is to be transferred to the buyer. Now, let us proceed with the discussion of each Incoterm. We will only emphasize on the risk, cost, and task of buyer and seller for every global logistic process. Okay. First is the X work or X warehouse. Seller will only manufacture the goods, then pack, ready for collection of buyer. From then on, buyers bears all the cost, risk, and task of delivery of goods from the factory of the seller down to the buyer's destination. So clearly, the responsibility of seller in X work goes only with the warehouse services and export packing. Moving further with the supply chain, there's FCA, FAS, and FOB. They are similar to one another, but FOB terms are agreed upon to be the most popular. Then, the seller's obligation of FCA, FAS, and FOB are from warehouse services, okay, down to the payment of origin forwarder fees. The seller will cover all charges like inland freight, port handling charges, and origin forwarded fees as soon as goods are loaded in the vessel. All further associated costs, risks are transferred onto the buyer. The buyer will pay the sea freight and all charges thereafter. If the seller agrees to pay for the sea freight, then the seller can sell the goods on CFR, CIF, CPT, or CIP Incoterms. So these terms are quite similar. CPT are very similar to CFR shipping terms. The difference being that CPT terms can be used in any mode of transport, while CIP similar to CPT, but they additionally include maritime insurance as stated in the name. Carriage and insurance paid to the seller takes all responsibility as in CPT terms, but insurance is also paid by them. If the seller decided to bears all of the responsibility up to and including unloading the goods at the named terminal and destination port, and the buyer agrees that he or she will pay the custom clearance, import duties, taxes, and delivery costs that is under the DAT term. Delivered at place terms state that the seller pays for and takes responsibility for everything involved in the shipment all the way to the delivering to an agreed destination. All the buyer pays for its import duties and taxes. For the buyer, this DDP term is a great option for minimizing risk. DDP terms means that the buyer will purchase the goods before the seller pays all the costs to get the shipment to its destination. The seller also pays any import duties and taxes accrued in the buyer's country of delivery. All the buyer has to do is unload their goods from truck packed outside. So it means that the seller is going to pay all of the costs from warehousing services up to delivery cartage to final destination. Of course, this could be a big deal, but as a seller, I think he already included all of the costs to the price of the goods being sold to the buyer. I hope that simple illustration of these Incoterms could give you an idea how these rules works and which global logistic process it can be applied. Again, these tasks and costs are upon the agreement of both buyer and seller. Incoterms are just guide to easily decide the responsibilities of buyer and seller. Here in your screen, I had added some of the additional reading resources wherein you could take a look if you want to furtherly understand what is the nature and concept of Incoterms. You can go directly also to the YouTube because there's a lot of videos that explain how Incoterm works and what are the related tasks and costs to be bear by the buyer and the seller. I think that's for today, and I hope that you gain a lot of knowledge from this chapter. You have to remember all of the terms because throughout the semester we are going to use some of the conditions and clauses for the international trade practice. If you have any further questions, just send me a message and I will be much willing to answer all of your queries. Thank you very much. This is your professor, Christine Joy Simpao.